The headlights caught him first, a tall silhouette stumbling along the shoulder of Route 9, no jacket, dress shoes slipping on gravel, one hand pressed to his ribs like he was holding something in. Maya Whitfield almost didn't stop. 12 years old, her mother had told her never stop for strangers on this road, and 22 years of nursing shifts had taught her exactly what kind of night this could turn into. But something about the way he moved, too controlled for a man in pain, too aware of his surroundings even while stumbling, made her ease off the gas instead of pressing down on it. She pulled the old Honda onto the shoulder 15 feet ahead of him and watched in the rearview mirror as he straightened, assessed the car, assessed her, and only then started walking toward it. She rolled the window down 2 inches. Not all the way. She'd learned that much from 6 years of night shifts in the ER. "You need a hospital?" she asked.
He shook his head.
Up close, even in the dim wash of the dashboard lights, she registered the details the way she registered everything. Automatically, clinically, a habit built from 1,000 patient intakes. Black suit, no tie. The jacket torn at the shoulder seemed like something had grabbed and pulled. A cut above his eyebrow, already scabbing, not fresh. His hands were steady. That was the thing that struck her most. A man walking alone at midnight on a dead stretch of road outside the city, blood on his collar, and his hands did not shake. "I need a phone," he said. His voice was low, accented but precise, each word placed like it cost something to spend. "Mine is gone." "Where's your car?" "Also gone." She should have driven away right then. Later, replaying it, she would identify that exact moment as the one where the story could have ended before it began. Instead, she reached across and unlocked the passenger door, because she had spent her whole life being the person who stopped, who checked pulses on strangers at bus stops, who could not physically make herself leave someone bleeding on the side of a road even when every instinct screaming beneath her ribcage told her this was different. This was not an ordinary emergency. This was something with teeth.
"Get in," she said.
"I'm not taking you anywhere but home."
"I've got an early shift."
He looked at her for a long moment before he moved, like he was recalculating something. Then he folded himself into the passenger seat, too large for the space, knees nearly touching the glove box, and pulled the door shut with a care that seemed strange for a man who'd clearly just come from violence. "Gene," he said when she asked his name. Nothing else. No last name offered, and she didn't push. "Maya," she said. "I'm a nurse. Trauma unit, mostly. If you start looking worse, I'm taking you to St. Agnes whether you like it or not." "I don't get worse," Gene said, and something in his tone made her glance sideways at him, at the flat certainty of it, the way he said it not as a boast but as a fact he'd tested many times. The drive was 15 minutes. He gave her cross streets in a part of the city she vaguely recognized, Koreatown, the good side of it, the side with the tailored storefronts and the restaurants that didn't need English signage because everyone who mattered already knew where they were. She noted the cologne first, cedar, and something colder underneath it, smoke maybe, or the ghost of gunmetal, though she told herself that last part was her imagination working overtime after a 12-hour shift. She noted his hands next, resting on his knees, and the way his eyes tracked every car that passed them, every parked vehicle, every shadow between streetlights, cataloging threat the way she cataloged vitals. "You're not from around here," she said, meaning the neighborhood she was driving him toward, the wealth of it a sharp contrast to her own street of sagging porches and boarded windows 2 miles south. "I am from exactly here," Gene said. "That is the problem tonight." She didn't ask what he meant. She had a rule about strange men and strange nights. The less you knew, the safer you slept. She pulled up outside a building with a discreet awning and no name on the door, and before she'd even put the car in park, 2 men in dark suits materialized from the entrance, moving fast, hands inside their jackets until they saw who was in her passenger seat. Gene said something short in Korean out the window, and the men's postures changed instantly. Not relaxing exactly, but shifting into a different kind of alert, the kind reserved for someone they answered to rather than someone they hunted. That was the moment everything changed, though she wouldn't understand the shape of it until later. "Thank you," Gene said, one hand on the door. He studied her for a beat too long. "You did not have to stop." "Nobody has to do anything," Maya said. "Get that eyebrow looked at." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he was gone, swallowed into the building with his men closing ranks around him, and she drove home telling herself it was over, whatever it had been, and that she would never think about the stranger with the steady hands again. She was wrong within 6 hours. She woke to a knock at 7 in the morning, 3 hours before her alarm, the kind of knock that had weight behind it, deliberate and unhurried. Through the peephole she saw 2 black SUVs at the curb of her narrow street, engines running, and a man in a suit standing on her porch with his hands folded in front of him like he was at a funeral. Behind him, further down the walk, stood Jean, jacket changed, eyebrows stitched clean, looking entirely unlike the man who had climbed into her car 12 hours earlier. He looked like what he actually was. She understood that immediately, the way you understand weather before it arrives, some pressure change in the air. She opened the door because there was no version of pretending she wasn't home. Her car was in the driveway, and the porch light was still burning from the night before. "You know where I live," she said. It wasn't a question. "I looked at your license while you were checking my ribs," Jean said. "You didn't check my ribs, but you would have. I saw it in how you drove. Careful. Watching me for signs. You're a mafia boss." She said it flatly, testing the word against the shape of him standing on her cracked concrete steps in a $100,000 suit, for bodyguards fanned across her tiny yard like they expected an ambush at any second. "I gave a ride home to a Korean mafia boss." "You gave a ride home to a man who needed one," Jean said. "The rest is a separate fact." "Not to me it isn't." "No," he agreed. "I imagine not." She should have shut the door. She thought about it, the exact motion of it, the deadbolt turning, the simple physical act of ending this before it became anything at all. But there was something underneath his stillness that she recognized from the ER, the specific quiet of a man used to being the most dangerous thing in any room he entered. And beneath that, something else, something that looked almost like gratitude wearing a mask too unfamiliar to fit correctly. "Why are you here, Jean?" "Because last night, 3 men tried to put a bullet in the back of my head on a road where no one would have found my body until morning," he said, and his voice did not change at all as he said it, flat and precise, as a man reading a weather report. "And a stranger in scrubs stopped her car for me anyway. That does not happen in my world. I wanted to see the woman who did it in daylight before I decided what to do about it." "Decided what to do about it," Maya repeated. Her stomach dropped in a slow, cold way. "What does that mean for me?" "It means," Jean said, "that the men who tried to kill me last night do not yet know you exist. I would like to keep it that way. Which means, for a short time, someone needs to make sure you are not followed, not watched, not found. I am offering you protection you did not ask for, because you gave me help I did not ask for either. That is the whole of it. I don't need protection. I need you to leave." "You will need protection within the week," Jean said, without cruelty, only certainty. "Whether or not I offer it." She wanted to call it a threat. It wasn't shaped like one. It was shaped like a diagnosis, delivered by someone who had learned, the hard way, that softening bad news never made it less true. She let him inside anyway. Not because she trusted him, she was clear with herself on that point even as she stood back from the door, but because some instinct honed across 6 years of trauma triage told her that whatever storm had swept through his night had not finished blowing, and that closing her door would not close the distance between her small brick house and whatever war he carried behind his eyes. He did not sit until she told him he could. He noticed everything in her living room the way she had noticed everything in her car. The water-stained ceiling tile, the second-hand couch, the framed photo of her mother on the side table, but he said nothing about any of it, and something in his silence felt more respectful than pity would have. "Tell me what happened," she said, sitting across from him with her arms folded, putting the coffee table between them like a border she intended to hold. "A man I trusted decided my territory was worth more than my life," Jean said. "He is my cousin."
Was.
"I have not decided the tense yet." He looked at his hands. "He arranged last night. The car, the location, the men. It should have worked. It did not because I am careful and because a stranger in a Honda decided to stop for a man on the side of a road. You're telling me this because you deserve to know why your life is now more complicated than it was yesterday," Jean said. "Not because I am asking your forgiveness. I do not need it. am simply not a man who lies by omission when the omission could get someone killed. She wanted to hate the honesty of it. Instead, it landed somewhere else in her, somewhere she didn't examine too closely, a place that recognized in him the same brutal directness she used with grieving families in the family consultation room, the kind of truth that respected the person receiving it enough not to soften it into something false. "I have a shift in 3 hours," she said. "I know. St. Agnes, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., trauma floor for years." He said it without apology, a fact stated the way he'd stated everything else. "I looked into you before I decided to come here. I am careful, Maya. It is the only reason I am alive to sit in your living room this morning." That's not comforting. It was not meant to be comforting. It was meant to be true. She sent him and his men away an hour later with nothing resolved except a phone number she hadn't intended to give him and a promise, extracted more than offered, that a car would follow hers at a careful distance for the next several days, unseen unless she needed it. She told herself it was practical. She told herself a lot of things that week that were only partially true. The following days folded into a strange rhythm. She would leave for her shift and catch, in her mirror, a black sedan 2 cars back, present but never intrusive, gone by the time she reached the hospital doors. Twice, Jean himself waited outside St. Agnes at the end of her shift, standing beside his car with the patience of a man who had learned to wait the way soldiers learn to march, no impatience in his posture, no urgency in his stillness, just presence. The first time, she walked past him without a word. The second time, exhaustion cracking something open in her that professionalism usually kept locked, she stopped. "Why are you still here?" she asked. Not hostile, genuinely asking. "Because the man who tried to kill me has not been found," Jean said. "And because I find I want to know if you made it through your shift without incident more than I want to know almost anything else that happens in my day." The honesty of it startled her more than any threat could have. She studied his face under the parking lot lights, the sharp line of his jaw, the careful stillness he wore like armor, the small scar at his temple she hadn't noticed before, pale and old, years healed. "That's a strange thing to admit to someone you barely know." "I have not admitted much of anything in a very long time," Jean said. "I find I am poorly practiced at it." She should have walked away. She got in his car instead, told herself it was only because her own had a dying alternator and the walk to the bus stop wasn't safe after dark, told herself several other things too, none of which fully explained why she stayed in the passenger seat 20 minutes after he'd parked outside her house, both of them silent, the city noise outside muffled by tinted glass, his cologne filling the small space between them, cedar and smoke, warmer than she remembered from the first night. "Tell me about the woman," she said finally, because the ER had taught her that some silences needed to be broken before they calcified into something unspoken and permanent. "The one who made you like this." His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, and she almost apologized for asking. Then he spoke, low and even, each word placed with the precision of a man defusing something.
"Her name was Yuna," he said.
"She worked for the organization my father built, handling the parts of the business that required a woman's face instead of a man's fists. I loved her the way you love something you are not permitted to keep. When my cousin discovered it, he used her to send me a message about the cost of divided loyalty. She did not survive the message." He looked out the windshield instead of at Maya. "I have not let anyone close enough to matter since. It seemed safer for everyone involved. And now a stranger stopped her car for a bleeding man on a dark road, and I find myself outside a hospital at 7 in the evening waiting to see her face," Jean said. "I do not have a clean answer for what that means. I only know it is inconvenient, and I have stopped being able to make myself care." Maya sat with that for a long moment, the weight of it settling somewhere beneath her sternum, in the same place she carried every hard truth a patient's family had ever handed her. "That's not tenderness, Jean. That's a warning." "Yes," he agreed. "I am aware." She got out of the car anyway when they reached her house, and he did not follow her to the door, and that restraint, more than anything else he could have said, was what convinced her the danger in him was real, and the man underneath it might be too. The threat found her 9 days later, exactly the way Jean had predicted it would, though not in the shape either of them expected. She was walking to her car after a double shift, feet aching, mind already 3 hours ahead planning sleep, when a man she didn't recognize fell into step beside her in the hospital parking garage. Too close, his hand closing around her upper arm before she'd fully registered the danger. "You're going to get in a car with me," he said low, urgent, "or your friend Jean finds out what happens to people who help him." Every instinct from 6 years of de-escalating combative patience fired at once. She did not scream. She did not freeze. She drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus with the exact economy of motion she used when a 200-pound patient came out of anesthesia swinging, and when his grip loosened, she twisted free and slammed her keys, blade out between her fingers, across his cheek hard enough to draw blood. He staggered back with a curse, and that half-second was enough for her to reach her car, lock the doors, and dial the number Jean had given her with hands that did not shake nearly as much as she expected them to. He arrived in 6 minutes. She would later learn he had been 11 minutes away and had broken every traffic law in the city to close that distance, though he never said so. She read it instead in the state of his men when they arrived, breathless in a way trained soldiers rarely were, and in the particular stillness that came over Jin's face when he saw the abrasion on her jaw where the man had grabbed too hard. He did not touch her. He stood very close, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, close enough that his cologne wrapped around her, cedar and smoke, and his voice when he spoke was quieter than she had ever heard it, quiet the way a held breath is quiet. "Tell me what he looked like," Jean said. "I hurt him," Maya said, instead of answering. "I want you to know I hurt him first." Something moved behind Jin's eyes, something that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. "I know," he said. "I saw the mark on your keys." And then, quieter still, "You should not have had to." "No," she agreed. "I shouldn't have." That was the moment she made the choice that would define everything after. Not a grand declaration, not a dramatic gesture, just a simple, cold decision made in a parking garage with adrenaline still burning through her blood. She could walk away from this. She could tell Jean to keep his men and his money and his war and never speak to her again, and there was a version of her life where that was exactly what happened, where she went back to 12-hour shifts and a quiet house and never thought again about a stranger on a dark road. Instead, she looked at him and said, "Find out who sent him, and then let me help you end this, because I am done being someone your enemies can use as leverage." "That is not how this works," Jean said. "You are not part of this world." "I wasn't," Maya said. "Then a man grabbed my arm in a parking garage and told me your name like it was supposed to make me afraid of you instead of him. So, I think I'm part of it now, whether either of us wanted that or not." He studied her for a long moment, and something in his posture shifted, some old certainty cracking under the weight of her refusal to be protected in the passive way he clearly intended. "You are not what I expected," he said finally, "when I decided to come to your door." "Neither are you," Maya said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with danger. The days that followed moved faster than she could fully track. She learned pieces of his world in fragments. The cousin, Sangwoo, who had orchestrated the attempt on Jin's life and was now hunting for any weakness he could exploit, any leverage that might force Jin's hand before the organization's council convened to decide whose claim to leadership was legitimate. She learned that the parking garage attack had been a message, not an accident, meant to prove that Jin's carelessness with a stranger had already cost him control of information he could not afford to lose. She learned, too, in the small hours when neither of them could sleep and ended up sitting on her back porch steps with 2 cups of coffee going cold between them, that Jean had not laughed. Actually laughed, not the controlled, almost smile he rationed out like currency, in over 3 years, and that the sound of it, when she finally coaxed it out of him over a story about a patient who'd tried to leave the ER still attached to his four-pole, seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "You are the first person in longer than I can measure who has made me feel like I am allowed to be a person and not only a name people fear," Jean said one night, low, almost involuntary, the words seeming to cost him something to release. "I do not know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it," Maya said. "It's not a problem that needs solving." "Everything is a problem that needs solving," Jean said. That is how I have stayed alive. Maybe that's the problem, she said, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something unguarded and almost young, and for the first time since the night on the dark road, she let herself imagine a version of this that did not end in blood. The council meeting was set for the following week. A gathering where Jin's claim to lead the organization his father had built would be tested against Sangwoo's accusations of weakness, of compromised loyalty, of a boss too soft to hold territory that other men would take from him by force if given the chance. Maya knew, without being told outright, that her existence in his life had become Exhibit A in that argument, proof that Jin had let sentiment override discipline. She also knew, with the same clarity, that walking away now would not undo the danger she was already in. It would only strip away whatever protection remained and leave her exposed with nothing gained. So when Jin told her, 2 nights before the council convened, that she should leave the city for a week, stay somewhere his enemies couldn't trace, let the storm pass without her in it, she said no. You're doing the thing you said you never do, she told him. Deciding for me instead of with me. I am trying to keep you alive. I know how to keep myself alive, Jin. I want to help end this instead of hiding from it. She stepped closer, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the specific stillness that meant he was holding something back. You told me your cousin used Yuna to send you a message. He'll do the same thing to me if I disappear, and you still walk into that council room alone. The only way I'm actually safe is if this ends. Let me help end it. You are not a soldier. No, Maya said. I'm a nurse. I know exactly what a body looks like when it's been hurt in every way this world can hurt someone, and I know exactly what it takes to keep someone alive when everyone else has given up on them. That's not nothing, Jin. That's not weakness. Stop treating it like it is. Something in him broke open then, quiet and total, the way a dam gives all at once after holding for years. He crossed the small distance between them and kissed her like a man crossing a line he had sworn, on Yuna's memory, never to cross again, careful at first, deliberate, and then not careful at all, his hand to her jaw, her fingers curling into the lapel of his jacket, cedar and smoke and the taste of coffee gone cold between them. When he pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, his breath uneven for the first time since she'd met him, he said, I told myself staying away from you was survival. I've been lying to myself since the night you stopped your car. I know, Maya said. I've known for a while. They did not speak of what it meant beyond that night, because there wasn't time to, because the council meeting arrived 2 days later, like a blade finally falling, and Sangwoo's move against them came faster and harder than either of them had prepared for. He struck the night before the council convened, not at Jean directly, but at Maya. A car forcing hers off a side street 2 blocks from her house, 3 men spilling out before she'd even registered what was happening, one of them reaching for the door handle while she was still fumbling for her phone. But she was not the same woman who had climbed into her car 9 days earlier ignorant of the world closing around her. She had spent the last week learning, at Jin's insistence, the exact pressure points that dropped a man twice her size, the specific angle that turned a set of car keys into a weapon, the location of the small blade Jean had given her that now sat clipped inside her waistband where her scrub's pocket usually held a penlight. When the first man's hand closed on the door handle, she was already moving, driving the blade into the meat of his forearm with the same clinical precision she used inserting in 4, and in the chaos of his scream, she was out the passenger door and running, not toward her house, but toward the alley she knew connected 2 streets and would slow down men in dress shoes who did not know the neighborhood the way she did. Jin's men found her 4 minutes later, breathless, blood that was not hers on her hands, standing over the second man she had put down with a fire extinguisher stolen from a laundromat's exterior wall, holding it like a club, her eyes blazing with an adrenaline that had not yet let her feel the fear underneath it. Jean arrived himself 8 minutes after that, and the look on his face when he saw her standing upright, breathing hard but whole, was not relief exactly. It was something closer to recognition, like he was seeing, finally and fully, the shape of the woman he had let into his world. You said you weren't a soldier, he said, voice rough. I'm not, Maya said. I'm a nurse who's been paying attention. The council meeting the following morning became, in the end, less a debate and more a reckoning. Sang-woo arrived expecting to present Jin's attachment to an outsider as proof of weakness, evidence of a boss who had lost the discipline required to hold territory. Instead, Jin walked into that room with the names and locations of the 3 men who had attacked Maya the night before, extracted through methods he did not fully explain and Maya did not fully ask about, along with proof, meticulously gathered over the preceding days by men loyal only to Jin, that Sang-woo had been selling territory information to a rival organization for the better part of a year. The same information that had led to the failed assassination attempt on the dark road where this entire story had begun. Maya was not permitted into that room, but she was permitted to stand outside it, close enough to hear raised voices and, eventually, silence. And when Jin emerged an hour later, his jacket still perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable to anyone who did not know him the way she'd come to, he found her waiting exactly where he'd left her. "It's finished," he said. "My cousin will not trouble either of us again. And the council? They will follow a boss who protects what is his without apology," Jin said. "I have decided that includes you. Publicly now. Which means the danger does not end, Maya. It only changes shape into something I understand better." She did not flinch from that. She had already made her decision, somewhere between the parking garage and the alley and the kiss that had tasted like every truth he'd been withholding for 3 years. "I didn't ask for the safe version of this, Jin. I asked to help end it. That's not the same as asking for easy." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face, the careful architecture he had built over years of loss, of discipline, of a world that punished softness, shifted permanently, visibly, in a way she understood. She was the only person in the world who had ever witnessed. "My father used to say that a man's empire is only as strong as what he is willing to lose for it," Jin said. I did not understand what he meant until a woman in blue scrubs stopped her car on a dark road for a stranger. "That's not an apology," Maya said, something warm cracking through the exhaustion still sitting heavy in her chest. "No," Jin agreed, and this time when he almost smiled, it reached all the way to his eyes. "It is closer to a confession." They stood there together outside the council room, the city continuing its indifferent noise beyond the windows, and Maya understood, with the particular clarity that came from having survived something neither of them could take back, that she was not choosing safety, and she was not choosing a fairy tale ending wrapped in silk and easy promises. She was choosing him, the man beneath the empire, the stillness beneath the violence, the confession beneath the silence, with her eyes fully open to everything that choice would cost her, and finding, when she weighed it honestly against the version of her life where she had simply driven past a stranger on a dark road, that she would make the same decision again without hesitation. Some cars we get in to know exactly where the road leads. This one, she thought, watching Jin's hand find hers without either of them quite deciding to let it happen, she was glad she had chosen anyway. If this story kept you up past your bedtime, you already know what to do. Smash that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling me which line hit you hardest, because I read every single one. New dark romance drops every week, so make sure that notification bell is on, because trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming next.